What are the implications of that? This is probably also a good question. Some problems have serious consequences in an organization, and some don't, and understanding that would help you better design your product. What else have you tried? This can be a great question. If they haven't even bothered to Google the solution, then it must not be a very big problem. Or if they're actively searching for solutions and have spent money trying things, this could also be very helpful in helping you understand whether or not this is important to them and what they might spend. Talk me through the last time that happened. This is an excellent way to do customer discovery. You may get a lot of insights by having them tell you about specific past experiences they've had, or even having them walk you through the process in their factory. You may spot things that they wouldn't otherwise articulate, and it's going to be anchored in specific past behaviors rather than future-looking ideas. Would you pay X for a product which did Y? Not surprisingly, this is a bad question. It's future-looking. You're asking them to speculate on what they might spend in the future. The better way to ask the question is, what are you paying now for a product which did Y? How are you dealing with it now? This is also probably a good question. It anchors them into current behaviors and recent past behaviors, and that'll give you some solid data around your customer discovery. The mom test is simple. Ask questions in a way that your mother couldn't lie to you. People want to help, you just have to give them an excuse to do so. The big idea around the mom test. People are optimistic about the future and fuzzy about the past. So we want to anchor them down in specific past behaviors to get good, solid customer discovery data. As part of customer discovery, perhaps one of the most important questions is, can people afford to buy your product, or how much could they spend? And there are ways to try and tease that out in your customer discovery process. Surprisingly, in customer discovery, people are often willing to talk about their budgets, or at least they're willing to help you understand how big the problem is. Sometimes you'll need to back into the answer. If they're not able or comfortable telling you how much they're spending, you could ask them, how many people are working on that project? If it's 5 people or 50 people, it's quite a different scale of a problem. Or you might need to bound the problem with them by asking, is that a $10,000 problem or is that a $1 million problem? And if they say it's a $100,000 problem, you'll know you're somewhere in the middle. Or you could narrow them down and say, is that a $500,000 problem or a $100,000 problem? Or if they say, no, that's a $5 million problem, then you'll know something very different. Sometimes by understanding how many people are in the organization or the size of the budget, you'll be able to understand how big the problem is. So good questions to ask in this area. How big is the budget for that project? What does a project like that typically cost? Or how many people are on that project? What are you spending on that now? If they don't know, then either you're talking to the wrong person or it's not a big enough problem that it's important to them. Is that a capital expense or operating? In businesses, sometimes capital expense budgets are done on an annual basis, and operating managers have a certain discretionary income that they can spend. Understanding who makes a decision and how it gets made can also be important in making the sale. Who decides? In business-to-business sales, sometimes purchases above a certain level have to get a C-level signature from the CEO, CFO, or CIO. And so if you want to sell in certain organizations, understanding who has to sign off at what level could be important. As an example, in the university setting, things over $5,000 need to be bid to 3 different vendors. But if it's below that threshold, it doesn't necessarily have to follow that process. So understanding those sorts of things in designing your product and setting a price point can be important. You might also ask about bidding requirements. Some government entities, such as universities, have requirements to get multiple bids, and understanding that could be important. Capital budgets get approved differently than operating budgets, and people inside the organization may have a certain level of discretionary income. Where does the money come from? Sometimes the user is not the purchaser. A perfect example of that is parents and kids. Parents buy toys for their children, for example, and the child is the user, but the customer is really the parent. So you might need to understand the value proposition for both of those individuals. And in healthcare, it can be even more complicated. The user is different than the provider, which is different than the payer. Understanding these linkages is an important thing to figure out during customer discovery. How do people get paid? Understanding the economics of the channel can also be important. So for example, if you want to work through a wholesale and retail distribution channel, knowing the typical markups at each stage is going to be important so you can figure out whether or not you have a viable business, and so that you can make sure that each member of the channel has appropriate incentives to try and move your product through the channel. So some questions to ask in this area might be, what's the process for that? Or tell me about a recent new vendor. This might also help you understand if you want to sell inside an organization, do they have difficult qualification requirements, or having them walk you through a recent new vendor who came on board could help identify problems early in how you might actually sell your product inside that organization.
When we speak to you during our meeting, we'd like to discuss your market hypothesis and conduct some exercises about your product market fit. Please think about this in advance. Before we meet, we ask you to think about this phrase and fill it in for your technology. What do you believe your technology offers to which customer? When we meet, we also want to work through this sort of Mad Lib slide for your Catalyst grant proposal. I tried to think of an easy example. Let's talk about something like Velcro. So you think about who is your customer segment and think specifically about the type of business person that might be. In this case, I might say the customer segment would be a product buyer for a shoe company, would pay to create shoes that are easy to put on small children and infants and take off in a way that increases sales and is unlike the difficulty of using shoelaces. Remember, the customer discovery process you're learning here is crucial to your Catalyst grant application. The I-Core program is incredibly useful for our researchers. Not only will it help you in this application, but in your other grants you write as well. The Catalyst grant is focused on commercialization, and if you do not include any sort of customer discovery interviews and feedback, you most likely will not be funded through this grant program. We truly believe in the merits of this program, and we know that you will learn a lot and realize whether your product may be of interest to potential customers. We look forward to meeting with you soon. As a reminder, we did change the Catalyst grant program slightly this year in that anyone receiving the funding must have already or will go through some sort of customer discovery program within a year of receiving the funding. We may also stagger the receipt of the funding in order to comply with this rule. This can be any sort of program, including the I-Core program locally or nationally, as well as a program such as the Student Startup Challenge for students, or for instance, the Idea Advance program that is run through the state. So remember, this process is very important to learn, and this is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to doing customer discovery for your new project.